Hey everybody, Tommy here, World at War Comics, and my next guest is the one, the only Mr. Dan Didio, former publisher of DC Comics. He's done so much, creator, writer, Frank Miller with Ancient Enemies, and right now he's doing Defenders of the Earth with Mad Cave Studios. And right now, the first trade has been released this week, so get into your comic shops and order or pick up your trade of Defenders of the Earth. All right, without further ado, here is Dan Didio and I. Hope you enjoy. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to World at War Comics. My next special guest, the one, the only Dan Didio. Dan, it is such a pleasure to talk with you. You have done so much in the industry, from TV to DC Comics to Frank Miller Presents, and then obviously today we want to talk about Defenders of the Earth. There's a bunch of other stuff in between there. We could probably spend the next hour just going over your portfolio, Dan. But before we jump into all of that, how are you doing, my friend?
Really good, thanks. Really good. It's kind of nice. It's when you're working 40 years, which I was working for 40 years, and then you come to a stop or a slowdown. It's a little disconcerting because you're so used to being busy all the time. But I'll tell you, it took a little while to get used to it, but now I'm kind of enjoying it, and I think that's the good part about things. This is what you really work. Actually, if you want to be truthful, this is what you work all your life too, is to have that time you can sit back and relax and enjoy it, and that's what we're doing. You know.
Well, you've always been a storyteller. Maybe we could start early, real quick, if that's okay. I would
Sure.
love to touch on your career. If I'm not mistaken, it kind of started on the TV side, right?
Oh
Before,
yeah, I mean, I did 20 years of television before I was with comics. I didn't get into comics until later. I mean, let me back that up. I've always liked comics. I've always enjoyed comics, and it's funny. While I was working in TV, I actually found ways to get involved in comic related stuff because it was fun. The lucky part for me was Jimmy Palmiotti was a neighbor of mine in Brooklyn. We met at one of the local comic shops. Actually lived in the same building together in Brooklyn. Found that out later, and then we became a friendship. And through him, I met a number of people. Did some little writing on the side. Did some work for Nick Barucci's Dynamic Forces company while he was doing some stuff. I did some work for Wizard magazine, believe it or not, back in the day, and a couple of the other magazines along the way. Just things to keep me excited and things I enjoyed. Um, and I started at CBS, then I worked over at ABC, was in children's programming during that period of time. And then from there, I got into animation with the computer animated company Mainframe. But I was doing a lot of travel. And ultimately, I wanted to settle down a bit. So I wound up meeting with Paul Levitz, and then he created a position for me at DC, and then we were off to the races.
you did pretty well at DC. Yeah, you kind of moved.
It's interesting because getting into comics and knowing it as well as you do, but also with a completely different resume than most of the people that were there. It was you felt the gears grinding a little bit because I came at it in a much different way than people working there up until that point. And I came in top down, which is a lot different from all the people who came up, through the ranks over the years. So there was that friction that created, but hopefully through that friction we were able to examine things and approach things in a new and different way, which I felt brought a different energy to the company while I was there.
Absolutely. Well, can you kind of tell us, just from your perspective and what you enjoy, um, do you look at your career from an executive level differently than you do from a creative level? And is there one that you enjoy more than the other, or is it just two different aspects of the industry that you
It, it,
participated in?
it's interesting because you can really bifurcate my time at DC into two different things. The first half was the executive editor position, which you were much more roll up your sleeves on the creative aspect and really building stuff from the ground up. And then when you go to the publisher, co-publisher side, you're really looking at the company as a whole, profitability, and really looking to a way to push the business forward more so than just tell good stories, what people used to say. So if you look at the two pieces, I look at the time from Countdown to Infinite Crisis, probably to end of 52 weekly series, maybe to Blackest Night, as a real golden moment. And then on the opposite side, when Jim and I took over as publishers at DC, it was the launch of New 52, which was really a company-wide event and really an initiative more so than just a big story.
And then, just from a fan perspective, right there, the new 52, there's people that were not fans of it. Me, myself, I thought like what Scott Snyder did on Batman, obviously Jeff Johns, there was just some amazing stuff that came out of New 52. And I think the further away from that we get, the more we realize how much was actually accomplished and the storytelling that was taking place. And now I think there's even a more appreciation. I think that's kind of normal when you go through change. People don't like
Yeah,
it.
of course.
They
Well,
look back and
it
they're like,
was dramatic. I mean,
yeah.
remember we changed the color of Nightwing's costume. People can't handle things like that. So I mean, that was traumatic. And I say that jokingly, but I'm not kidding you when I say I had writers coming in and pitching me stories on how to get him back in blue, and I'm like. Is that what's important to you about this character? Is the color of his costume? Should we be concerned about who he was? But with New 52, for me, it wasn't just about the superhero stuff. We mentioned the stuff that Jeff did and Scott did, but on the opposite side for me, it was things like Men at War, and it was things like when I worked on Phantom Stranger and all these other Animal Man, I Vampire, all these crazy corners of the DC universe. That's my DCU. I came into DC more interested in House of Mysteries, House of Secrets than I were World's Finest and Superman. So I loved all the crazy aspects. And what New 52 gave me the opportunity to do was to create a platform where these other genres and these other type of things that I held so dear got a chance to be seen on equal ground as the mainstay superheroes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure you're kind of following everything that's going on at DC right now with the All In. It seems like they're kind of taking a little bit of that approach because we're getting like a Mr. Terrific series. We're getting some series from some characters that normally don't get a lot of love in a issue or an arc on their own that often, which I love because these characters just mean a lot to me, and it's really nice
Yeah.
for them to get a moment to shine. I don't know if that's relatable at all to what you
I,
try to do.
it's I think anytime you start to get away from just those core characters, because I mean, I used to talk about the strength and weaknesses of DC Comics, and one of the strengths also was one of the weaknesses. The strength of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, those characters was so strong and so recognizable and so iconic in their own right. It limited the amount of material and types of stories you could tell with them because there was an expectation for those characters. Every time we got away from that expectation, it got people jittery. Marvel had a much deeper bench than DC did, meaning they could go 20, 30 characters in and still be able to have characters could support series, and DC didn't have that same bench. So anytime they had the opportunity to grow that bench and push out different characters and different sensibilities, I jumped at it. And that was my one goal during my entire tenure at DC, was always trying to expand the line beyond just the superheroes, those core superheroes. And when I got there, we did a line of books called Focus, which we used to call, it was superpowers without being superheroes. We did the Focus books. I did the first wave books where we brought the pulp heroes back. We brought the Hanna-Barbera characters in. We brought we tried the new age of heroes, constantly trying different ways to create something new because I always felt new is where the future was going to be. And it's funny, you get to be a little bit of a historian about comics and when you're working in the business. And I always gravitate to 1968, 69 for DC Comics. Why I do that is it was right after what I call the collapse of Batman, right after the Batman TV show ends. And it basically, at that point, when Batman was at its peak with the Adam West series, Batman was featured in almost every single book, including things like Jerry Lewis comics, everything. He was on the cover everywhere because he sold everything. And then when the show ended, it took Batman with it, and Batman collapsed as a character, creating this monstrous void in the line. But it also created necessity. And when you have that necessity, you get characters like the Creeper and Metamorpho and all these other weird corner characters that never existed past 6 to 18 issues. You know what I mean? They were very short-lived characters, but they became favorites of people reading at that time and people wanting to grow up and do those characters later on. And that's what I always hope to do, is create new ideas, new characters that might not have been super successful when we launched it, but got people excited to the point that they might want to come back and do it. So when you look at Mr. Terrific was one of the books of New 52. So the fact that somebody's trying to do a new Mr. Terrific book now is a good thing because it showed that that character made an impression when we launched them in New 52, and they want to build on that legacy that was created at that point.
Absolutely. I mean, he's even going to make an appearance in the new Superman movie from James
Yeah.
Gunn. So, I mean, absolutely. And I think he's become a pretty popular character. And I think with the movie, that's just going to help.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's what's fun about it. It's fun, that's what those things. That's what makes it exciting. And when they start to become regulars, I always just say the strength of a character. You know, a character is successful when he appears in books not his own. It's one thing to have Superman appear in your book, but if your character is strong enough to appear in Superman's book, it shows that you made it. So the fact that he's doing something like that's a good thing. You know.
yeah, I think that's a really good perspective to have. So, I'll think about that next time when I see that happen. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then you did this arc Ancient Enemies over at Frank Miller Presents. Was that a story that you've been kind of sitting on for a long time? How did that come about?
Absolutely. It was, it's in a funny way, it was an ultimate DC line in a weird way. Way back when it was just a grain of an idea that I had kicking around for a long time. I wanted to get it out. And when Frank and I, what happened was it was during COVID. I'm down in Florida. My family's up in New Jersey. But every time I went to visit them, I used to stop by and visit Frank because I know he was sort of a little isolated in his house as well. So we got a chance to sit down. And I used to go there and just talk comics for a while. And what we love to talk about is the craft of making comics, what we like to see. And one of the things that I thought was most interesting in that conversation was about how earlier on, again, 60s, 70s, writers and artists used to mentor other writers and artists to be able to help them. Because in those days, um, editors were all former writers and artists, or in those days. Because again, in those days, up until the 90s, the role of an editor paid better than the role of a writer and artist. You made more money being an editor, so therefore a lot of the talent gravitated to editing just for the stability of check, a better paycheck, and then also, just making a little bit more money. Not until the 90s, with the launch of Image, did the writers and artists realize they can make more money than the staff, and then ultimately the need for editors, writers and artists to be editors wasn't as strong, and they also branched out. So editing changed a little bit, and it wasn't really about writers and artists mentoring new writers and artists, but it became more about administrative work in an editing role, just getting these books out and getting on schedule and things of that nature. So Frank and I were looking at a lot of the talent, a lot of the people. He always likes to see new people rise. He tells the story about how he was mentored by people like Will Eisner and Neil Adams, and how Neil Adams kicked him out of his office 4 times before he finally helped him get some work. So we started with the idea that we were going to help mentor people moving forward. But the market, it was difficult at the moment, and ultimately Frank is very independent. So he wanted to make sure that we maintained our independence. Hard to do that in the marketplace we are right now. So he went on and did more of the things that he wanted to do, and I moved on to other stuff too. But had a blast working with him. It was a great 2 to 3 years of just sitting talking comics with Frank Miller. Not exactly where I ever expected my career or life to go, but happy it got there.
I think there'd be a tremendous amount of people that would love to trade places with you to get that experience to sit with Frank and just kind of talk comics for a long time. Yeah, this point you make about editing and kind of the change of the role of the editor, and I don't want to say the importance of the editor because obviously it's still important, but the talent that you would get in editing prior to that 90s when Image came out, do you think that has helped or hurt comics today?
Um, everything evolves.
Yeah.
Everything's evolution. And there are certain things run a course, and certain things happen for a reason. And what happened, I think one of the things you recognized when Image breaks out is that you look at Marvel and DC, they have now 20, 30 years under their belt, 40 years under the belt, whatever number it is at that time. And they're working the same characters over again. So there's a churn, and there was an expansion of the line going on, and there was so much material being generated um, that a lot of the talent felt, you know, they were bringing their value to elevate other people's material when it made more sense to elevate their own material. The problem with everything in the world is one size doesn't fit all, and there's no set answer. So there's two sides to every coin. Chicken and egg. Is the talent successful because they worked on characters that were highly recognizable and got a chance to be exposed and recognized and build their own names? Or are these guys so big and popular and these characters are so tired that the talent is actually helping elevate the characters because the characters have so many stories expansive and people are exhausted. They're looking for some new interpretation that helps elevate it. So it goes back and forth. And I think it's a symbiotic relationship, meaning one doesn't live without the other. The industry doesn't live without Marvel and DC, but the industry won't grow without the talent that expands and tries different things within the line, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
So you need both. You can't just say either or on any of these things.
Yeah. And then just a personal question for you, if it's okay. When did this passion for storytelling start in your life?
You know,
Remember?
I just told you I had my office torn up, right? So
Yeah.
I found a box. I found a box. Um, And I think everybody, if anybody's a writer or wanted to be a writer when they were younger, they have the box, which is all your old ideas, all your old concepts, all your old things. Just you still kept them. They make absolutely no sense. Some of them are pretty interesting. You wonder, you're wondering, at least you're not surprised why they never sold because you realize you did it all wrong. Um, and but you hold on to them. You know what I mean? And you're always holding on to those ideas. And I did a couple of classes with the Kubert School, and I always used to joke about the people who came into my class. I had the people who were really raw and had no idea what comics were and wanted to learn it. I had guys that were really trying to perfect themselves, just trying to bring that finishing touch to what they created. Then you had the guys what I call the bucket list guys, the guys that had that one idea their entire life, and God help them, they're going to find a way to get this thing made, and I'm going to try to help them get that thing made. And then you had the last group, which is the people just wanted you to tell them they were good, and I'm the wrong person for that. I'll always find something to criticize.
That's hilarious. Did you find anything in that box that you used later on in your career, or was it?
As a matter of fact, one of the things I've switched over to is prose storytelling now. Is prose novels. I had a book come out a couple of years ago. I'm due for a second book, and I actually found something I completely forgot about that I actually love the idea that I'm fleshing out to be something a little bit more. So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
there was something in the box. It's just
That's
kind of
pretty
cool.
cool. See,
And
it
then again,
wasn't
it might
it
be
was
just good
all.
for me, but I felt it was something. I saw it again. It's weird to say this. I said I saw it again. I got excited. I'm like, holy shit, this is actually not bad. I thought I was really lame in those days, but there's something here.
That is so cool, man. That is cool. Well, let's talk about how you got contact or how you made contact with Mad Cave and got put on Defenders of the Earth.
Oh, it's a fun story because I was at San Diego Comic Con and I was just visiting some friends. I hadn't seen them for a while, some people I knew, and one of the people was Mike Martz, works for me at DC, and got into the Mad Cave jobs, doing a wonderful job over there at Mad Cave. And I went to see him, and he was talking, and he mentions Defense of the Earth, and I said, "Oh yeah," and he goes, "You worked in animation, you knew about this," and I said I knew enough about it. And he goes, "Yeah, we're trying to create a series." And I said, "Hey, what you should do to this?" And I say like two or three ideas, and I leave. And then I come back like an hour or two later, and I go, "And this is what else you should do. Maybe you should try to do this." And by the end of the day, somehow I had the Defenders of the Earth assignment, and he's hysterical. He thinks it's the funniest friggin' thing in the world. I think it's hysterical too. And for me, it was fun because it's characters I knew but didn't know that much about. So it gave me something new to explore. I had just finished working on a book for Condé Nast, which was the history of pulp characters from Street and Smith, which were Shadow and Doc Savage, two characters that I knew a lot about, but didn't know nearly as much as I did by the time I finished that book. And these were other characters that I knew about but didn't know much about. I love the idea and the challenge of trying to find a way to approach these characters with a sensibility and an idea that can move the characters forward because these characters have 80-year histories, and the fact that they've been around that long shows me that there's something intrinsic within those characters that still connects to an audience to this day. My goal was to extract that out and then to build something contemporary around it, a story that we could tell moving forward. Then I went back and rewatched the Defenders of the Earth series, and for me, it was what was intriguing about it when it was first on. It was an early production of Marvel Studios. Now, as a comic fan, I knew Marvel was getting into animation, and this was a work for hire from Marvel, even to the point that The Stan, I believe, did some of the development and was the story editor on early episodes of the series. Even so, when they did the Star Comics version of Defenders back in the 80s, Stan co-wrote the first issue with Bob Harris. I found that fascinating, and I love to explore the background on how things get made before going into it. And so I always go back and I do as much research as possible. I actually called Bob Harris to find out what went into that book, and Bob, into my infinite joy, Bob goes to me, "I have absolutely no recollection of ever working on that book." And I said, "Well, your name's in the credit, buddy." So. And I'm like, wait, you co-wrote a book with Stan Lee and you don't remember it? I said, holy shit, that's blasphemy.
That's hilarious, though. And that's so zero help, but I'm sure it was great catching up, right?
I always, I try. There's a couple of folks I try to touch base with every few months, just see how they're doing and how's things going. Everybody's sort of scattered out. When everything sort of started to come apart a little bit of DC, a lot of the folks that had moved out to the West Coast sort of gravitated back to the East, much like myself.
Yeah.
You just to be close to family and home.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, so Defenders of the Earth, we have this amazing storyline. We don't want to give too much away. People need to get out there and get these
Yeah.
issues, but the story between Flash Gordon and his son Rick, especially toward the end of issue 3 and 4, I'm loving this dynamic of Rick wanting more out of this relationship. Flash realizing he needs to be there, but he's being torn in a lot of different other areas. Can you kind of talk about where this storyline came from and how you are developing it?
That was the crux of the story that I wanted to tell. And actually, it's some of the things that I tried to touch upon in Ancient Enemies in a slightly different way. In Ancient Enemies, it was the haves and the have-nots, and the battle between the two and the culture war that comes with that. Here, this is the generational gap, which I felt really captured a lot of what was happening around us. And there's a real separation on how to approach things and do things differently between generations that I thought would be fun to explore within the cast of the story. And this story was built that way. That's what it is. And if you watch the cartoons, it was really kids following their parents. And now I take the story and I move it about 5 years forward where they're older. So now it's about them establishing their own right. And a lot of this comes from my own relationship with my own family when I see my own children. And one of the greatest things you can say is that you see your own kids being more successful at an age than you when you were at that same age. I think that's interesting to me because they're still kids in your mind, but how are they doing so good? And they're doing better than you did at that time. And that makes you feel like you did something right, but you still can't help be a parent. But you have to accept the fact that they have this level of achievement and accomplishment that elevates who they are. And that I love that. I love the dynamic. The one thing that was intriguing about the animated series that drew me to it was there was a little, slightly more mature sensibility than the more traditional animated series that were occurring at that time. They killed Dale Arden without saying her name or saying that she's dead, but they kill her in the first episode of that series. And they integrate her into this computer system, which is kind of weird. But I really wanted to explore that. I thought that was fascinating. I thought that was an interesting story beat. And then I've taken the Octon character and I've done a little bit of a twist with him over there too to bring him more into the lore as well. And it was fun because the Man Cave was launching a Flash Gordon book. This gave me territories to explore outside of what they were doing there because I had a different team dynamic. And even though it was built around the same core sensibilities as Flash, meaning Mongo and Ming's people and all this other stuff, it still existed in its own right. And that was fun. But fleshing out characters like Lothar and Phantom, I'm having a blast with. And probably the character I'm having the most fun with, which is hysterical, is Mandrake, because,
Yeah.
you know, I never understood the character that well, but now that I'm writing him, you fall in love with these characters along the way, and you see that it's hard to say when you're writing, but the characters take on their own personality, and the way they talk and they speak and all these things going on here. And the point is, he's his own character right now, and he's been on this path the whole way through it. And not that he plays my comic relief, but he definitely plays the sarcasm and just the attitude that I think is necessary to enjoy an interesting dynamic with the other characters on the team.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask you, did you have a favorite character so far in this series? So that's pretty interesting. Did you have a favorite character going into writing the title that has now changed because you've enjoyed Mandrick and everything that's going on?
Now, it's fascinating. I knew Flash. And to be honest with you, the characters I was most interested in were the kids. I found the kids to be because it's more fertile territory. Because again, much like when you're working with Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, there's a iconic nature who they are, and there's little less room to really explore their personalities and traits. So the places where you get a chance to really play attitude and growth are really with the kids. And that way it was more, and their growth was going to come from their relationships and exploring relationships with their parents. And that was something that I think that is highly identifiable for a person reading a book, and hopefully something that they can see a little bit of themselves in and understand how things can go wrong or right by how you trust or don't trust your own sensibility and your own kids' choices, you know?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, you got Jeremy over on Flash Gordon, and that's definitely kind of it's a storyline all in its own. And then you have
Yeah.
Defenders of the Earth, which is a story all in its own. So you don't need to read one to understand what's going on
Right.
with the other. But at the same time, have you had a chance to like collaborate a little bit with Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting story with Jeremy. When I was right before I was leaving DC, I was the guy bringing him in the door. I was getting him in, so I was to see him explode on the scene and really become this force within comics and people reacting strongly to it gets me excited because I had saw something in his writing that I thought was there, and it's fun to see this happen. So we had actually done a couple of signings together, so we always chat and we always go back and forth. But we're just not even trying to align stories, comparing stories. And the good part is we both have the same sensibility about flashes. So even though there's two separate storylines taking place, it's still the same character. You don't feel like this is a different Flash Gordon on one side or the other or not. And that's the one thing I didn't want to happen. If you want to be true, you always got to be true to who the character is at the core, and then you start to play with all this other stuff around the edges. You know?
Well, very good eyesight. A lot of DC fan. I'm more of a DC guy than I am a Marvel guy, but I love both
Yeah,
universes.
yeah,
But Jeremy Adams, I feel, is kind of the next big name at DC just from
yeah.
everything I've read. So I don't know, maybe a proud Papa moment for you to see him kind of explode on this scene like he is. Just got his own exclusive with DC, which
Yeah.
is pretty
Yeah. I
cool.
mean, what I saw, there was a couple guys, him, Tim Sheridan, there was a
Yeah.
handful of folks they had brought over from Warner Animation because Warner Animation was picking everybody's pocket and moving comic people to their side. And I said, wait a minute, how about a little bit this way? And it was for me, it was good to see those people because they were already well versed in those characters. They knew how to tell story with those characters. So it only made sense to give them the chance to tell that type of story over on the DC line. So like I said, it's fun to see these guys doing as well as they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as Defenders of the Earth goes, is this going to be just kind of an ongoing, or is there, do you kind of know where,
It's interesting. The story has a definitive ending, but also a cliffhanger ending at the same time. So it ends, but it leads opportunity. We've talked about doing more, and I have a proposal in that seems everybody seems to like, but it's just a matter of how the level of acceptance is on this, and then we go from there. As being a former publisher, you don't get too attached to anything because there is the realities and what I used to call the vagrancies of the system, meaning we might love it, but if nobody else does, then what's the point? But I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and the fun part is I feel the book escalating in just the sheer craziness and energy, and I'm just when once you get close to the end, you sort of just let it all hang out. So the issues 7 and 8 are pretty exciting, and we got into a little trouble schedule wise, and they're bringing a couple of artists in to help on number 6, which was more of a setup issue for the big finale, which is 7 and 8. And Jim moved over to 7 and 8, which is good because to get him really focused on just blowing that out in a big way is what I had hoped for. Because I'm pulling out I when I'm writing, I keep the show on in the background. So
you?
that stupid song is burned into my brain. But I keep the show on in the background just to remember who we are. So every once in a while, I see something in the cartoon. I'm like, I think I could put that in the script.
That's awesome. I'm having a blast reading it. Between Jeremy's Flash Gordon and your Defenders of the Earth, I'm getting all those, warm and fuzzies from some of the stuff I read a long time ago. And the story is amazing. I'm loving the dynamic between Rick and Flash. I'm glad that the story is kind of focusing in that area because it is a major differentiator, I think,
Yeah.
from other things that we've read in the past, especially with the kids being older and whatnot. So yeah, I'm absolutely loving it.
Yeah, oh no, we had the fun part for me is also been the Phantom stuff.
Yeah.
I sort of bring the Phantom story to a head in issue 5. We wrap up a lot of the storylines with the Phantom in issue 5 once the book comes back, and we're in the Seven Nations. There's a lot of stuff happening. Mandrake puts his mansion in the middle of the jungle just because he liked the spot. And ultimately, the Phantom has this big confrontation with his brother, which was a key factor in the animated series that I was able to bring out. And it was intriguing to me because I had done the full outline for the series, and then I went back and watched the entire animated series. And all of a sudden, I saw things occurring on the show that I had ideas and scheduled in the book, which made me feel like I was on the right track. So the fact that you're saying that makes me feel good because a lot of stuff that was in there on the show, I've taken the sensibility of that and found a slightly different way to tell it, but it definitely matches events and situations that happened in the animated series.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely love it. Well, Dan, what other things are you kind of working on that you can share or you would like to share?
I mean, it's what happened was I did a book called Hide or Seek 2 years ago, and it was a two-book deal that I did, and I own my second book. My second book's actually going to be a horror comic, a horror book. I like working to the young adult style audience that fits my sensibilities. I think I'm stuck there mentally and maybe emotionally. But it comes from my days working in animation and working in things and working to that younger audience that I feel most comfortable with. I can't get to a grittier level. That was fun about working with Frank. I said he was going places with story I would never think of. One of the funniest moments for me is when um, I asked him to bring one of his characters and ideas into Ancient Enemies, and he created the geek character for me. And I had one completely different idea about what that character was going to be, and then he turned in the 4-page origin the character that was so out there. I was like, holy shit. I had to rethink everything that I was doing. But it helped me push myself into a sensibility that I wasn't comfortable with, which was good because you want to get out of your own comfort zone when you're trying to do things. And that's one of the things I try to do now is push myself out of my own comfort zone. So working in prose is very difficult for me, but it's sort of what I want to do because I sort of did the comic thing. I sort of did the animation thing. You still want to create, but not nearly on the level and the intensity that you'd done all those years beforehand. So this is allowing me to do things. So I'm actually meeting on a couple of book ideas going forward and see if something happens. I did also do a couple of pitches in animation, but the animation business seems a little quiet at the moment. So I have it with a company or two, and we're talking back and forth, but there's no real traction yet. So I just focus on just finding things to keep me busy. That's why Defenders has been a lot of fun for me because that's the one consistency for me, the one thing that has a deadline. So it gets you into a rhythm. So you work on other stuff too. If I was left to my own devices, I could procrastinate from now until 2040, and still find excuses on why I didn't get to something. So I need a motivator, and that's one of them. The defensive stuff has been great in doing that. I'm having a blast with it. I'd love to do more with it, but I still have other stuff that I'm working on as well. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's amazing, Dan. Incredible. When you look at your incredible career and all these different things that you have been able to accomplish, is there something that you look back in that career and say, man, I would love to have a second chance of doing that role just because I enjoyed it very much? Or maybe you've learned something like, man, I could really add this piece now that I have all this other experience. You ever think about that? Or do you just
Yeah,
kind of move on and think to the
you
next
get
thing?
that question a lot. Do you have any regrets? Somebody said you got the regrets, and here's what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Everything is of a moment. I
Yeah.
try to explain this to people. Uh, how did you make that decision? Why did you make that decision? And you sit there, you scratch your head. It's like, yeah, I wonder why I made that. And at that moment, you don't know what the thousand determining factors were around you at that period of time that forced you or convinced you that this was the right path. So to go back and say, oh, I wish I could do this differently, all you're doing is going to go back, but there'll be different circumstances building something. Like I said, with everything that's successful, becomes difficult to maintain. And I picked two businesses in television and in comics that you can't stop to take a bow. I always tell people because what you have to do is you have to still put out books next month. So people might come to you and say, "Why did you do Final Crisis after Infinite Crisis?" And the answer was because Infinite Crisis was so successful that everybody needed the next success. So therefore, we had to come up with the next thing. And would I have the only thing I probably would have done differently on that is we had Infinite Final Crisis going, but it was supposed to be a year later, and it
Mm.
was supposed to be a slower buildup. But because of the success of Infinite Crisis, we started to have to compact timelines to keep the momentum of the sales going because you have different things of goals that you have to meet. So there's things that happen along the way that force your hand,
Yeah.
but the reality is if you went back and did it again, I'm sure there would be different circumstances forcing the same issue. Sometimes you get the perfect alchemy of things happening at the right moment. And people always ask you, the funniest one is like, why do you make bad comics? That's always a question people say. And I said, I don't think everybody went out to make bad comics. I think everything we do, we try to make as good as possible. I'm more surprised when a comic turns out good than when a comic turns out bad, because just the sheer weight of the schedule and the pressures and all these things that are involved. And when you think about the amount of work that's put into a single comic issue, the fact that it turns out as well as it do is a staggering achievement in its own right. But to maintain that level of creativity and momentum and keep it going with the amount of product, you know, it's what you say. Because then people go to you, well, then don't do so many books. And they said, I don't know about that because if I don't do so many books, then I have a full staff that might not be needed. I don't have a budget that I might not make. And there's all these other determining factors to keep the number of product going at the size it is and at the speed it's moving, because it's not just about making the books, but also keeping a business working, keeping the people working, and keeping everybody engaged. But there was a point there, and I think somebody did the numbers, an actual number. At one point, with all the books you're going in the various stages and the number of books are going either going forward at the moment or in development at the time, you could be working with up to 400 different people simultaneously on the DC line. 400 people working outside of our offices, working on product for DC at one particular moment, between writers and artists and inkers and colorists and letterers and all these people involved in the process. So you have a responsibility to keep this stuff moving, because this was work for a lot of folks. And if those books went away, it becomes, you have to make these hard choices along the way. So you want to, and there's always constantly new people trying to break in. There's a lot of people that you want to work with, that you work on, and you're trying to find that balance between the old guard, the current guard, and building a new guard at the same time. So that was fun in
Yeah.
its own way. I mean, and that's a sense of accomplishment, finding a way to keep those projects and people moving and keep the industry vibrant and alive. And I'm glad to see people still working very hard to maintain that ability, maintain that sensibility.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Dan. And I think that's the one thing that most comic book fans maybe don't have as much understanding as the business side.
Yeah.
Goes into actually, like, at the end of the day, it's a for-profit business.
Yeah, it's. I always laugh when people say that was a cash grab or a money grab, and I'm like, actually, every book's a cash grab and a money
Every
grab.
everything any business
Yeah,
does
kind
is
of.
a cash
Yeah,
grab.
but I did have a rule of approvals when I was executive editor. There was three goals for every book that you put out: make money, make talent happy, win awards.
Yeah.
So if it didn't fit one of those three buckets, it became hard to justify the ongoing creation of a series. But if you were able to do those things, and sometimes be able to do all three things in the same book, then you accomplish something spectacular and something that's important. And I think that's the things you have to have goals in mind, but you can't be so stringent in those goals that everything becomes one size fits all or one flavor. That's why you never really you want to have an established sensibility, but you're always finding exceptions to that just from the sheer volume you're doing. You can't do the same thing over and over again. The other question I used to get is, do you like every book you put out? And the answer is no. But I can't buy it. If I was a fan, I wouldn't buy every single book. The goal was to create as much product for his different sensibilities and different interests as possible to have the broadest audience possible. So therefore, if any part of that audience ever lost interest, we still have people out there buying our other material. So you don't want to keep on narrow focusing your material to limit the number of people buying, even if you can get more money out of them, because ultimately the more people you lose, the harder it becomes, and the prices keep on raising because of that. I did an analysis once, and it was a $2.99 book, I want to say like $5.99 Prestige, and a $20 hardcover. And at a $2.99 book, you had to sell 40,000 copies to make the same money as 25,000 copies of the Prestige and 10,000 of the hardcover. And I put the question to the editorial team, and the editors came back, let's do more hardcovers because they're not on a schedule, they're on better paper, they're this and that. And I said, great, we just lost 5,000 readers. Now what happens? I have 35,000, I'm still profitable.
Yeah.
20,000, I'm breaking even. And at 5,000, I'm losing money, you
Wow.
know? And so you have to be aware of the size and scope of your audience because as you limit things, every decision you make has a chance to either grow an audience or shrink an audience. And you have to weigh those two odds against each other when you make a decision to see whether or not you're on the right path, you know?
Yeah. Well, Dan, I mean, my love for comics, especially DC, you were very involved in
You
at
had a blast.
DC. Yeah, no, I mean, some of these tough, especially New 52 is really important to me. I started reading comics in 1985, 1986 time frame.
Okay.
I was about 10, 11 years old, and it really started with G.I. Joe and Transformers. And then I'm like, oh,
Sure.
this is a comic book. And so I go to the comic book shop, and then the whole world opened up for me. And for whatever reason, DC, outside of like Spider-Man and the Avengers, DC, just all those characters, I don't know why I was just very attracted to them. And so when you came on the scene, that's when I really kind of dove in head first. So I have a tremendous amount of appreciation for you and what you did at DC,
Oh,
and the
thank you.
rest of the team there too. I mean, to this day, Jeff Johns is one of my favorite writers ever.
He's,
I love
he
him.
is, I would say he's probably one of the quintessential comic book writers. He really understands the format and the formula and how to make it work to perfection. I mean, my admiration and stuff holds no bounds because, we really, really ran together for a long time. But it's funny you say that because I hear this all the time about, about how people moved up in it. And I could say one of the things you asked me before about what probably the thing that I'm most greatest thing that I feel most accomplished about. Um, I think over my time at DC, I touched every single character the company ever owned. I mean, even to the point, I think when I was working, just as I was heading out, we were doing one of the Young Animal books or a book that was part of the Young Animal crew, and we were figuring out Jason's Quest. That's how deep a dive we did.
That's wild, man. That's wild, man.
If anybody even knows what Jason's Quest, bully for you. But I'm talking about stuff. I was going through books, every one of the who's who's. I'm going through showcases, back issues, things of that nature, even to the point of there was a World's Finest Story that I remember buying when I was a kid, an imaginary tale. But character was called Supernova. We actually brought the Supernova idea into the 52 weekly series. And for me, that's I could sit there and I won't show my cards, but I'm geeking out on a level like, yeah, we pulled that one off. And the idea of touching upon those things and Porcupines, Jimmy Olsen, and all those crazy corners of the DC universe. That's what brings me to life. Is that all that insanity is what it's measured by. It's the sheer scope of how far out these reaching with ideas, and there was nothing that seemed like a bad idea before they even started working on it. Hell, we even did more prez. What do I know?
During that new 52 run, like you said, you started to create brand new characters, and then uplifting maybe C and D characters
Yeah.
and turn them into, C, B, and A characters. There was one character called Sideways. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yeah, I was the co-creator of that one.
Oh, That one I wish they would bring back. That was probably outside of like the core, the Trinity, and some of the other big book. That was by far I just started rereading it again and forgot how good that is. So I know you have nothing to do with it, but man, I don't know how many times we reach out to DC just in a very friendly way. Hey, any way you could bring back Sideways, that would be absolutely.
I listen. If you ever, that's the. I think, like I said, that was a character I co-created with Kenneth Ruckford. Then we brought Justin Jordan on to help out as well, because when you're a publisher, you don't have that much time to work on it. I love that character. That was for me. You talked about Spider-Man. Well, my two favorite characters are Spider-Man and the Hulk from Marvel. And Sideways was my Spider-Man book, unabashed. That was
Yeah,
what it was.
I like it.
And for me, also, my OMAC book with Keith Giffen was my Hulk book. I got to do, we actually did OMAC Smash, which was, again, I got that page of art hanging in my house because OMAC smashed. And I got the Sideways, I have a lot of Kenneth stuff because Kenneth is the one who really elevated that material. His artwork and style was
Incredible.
so strong. And honestly, the reason why I canceled that book was partially because of my own schedule, but also because Kenneth wasn't available anymore. And I couldn't see working on the book without him. And I had a lot of ideas. And it's funny because when I was leaving, getting ready to leave DC, I was telling the story to somebody the other day. I mean, getting ready to leave DC, and a team was working on Metal Men, which are my favorite characters in the DC universe. And and I knew I was heading out, and it's the first time I ever said, I want that. I want to do this book. I'm sorry, these other guys had it. We had to kill the other project. I said, I know that I'm winding down, and I want to do this. It's something that was in me. It was during my time at ABC Children's Television. I had actually developed Metal Men as an animated series
Mhm.
with Jeanette Kahn and Louise Simonson. I worked with them, and we had developed it all the way out. And it was going to be on. It was one of those things I was pushing forward to be on the ABC schedule right before Disney bought ABC and cleared out all our development and cleared us out with it, and put in their product. But I always wanted to do something with Metal Men. I tried to get Metal Men when I was at Mainframe Entertainment. I wanted to do a computer animated TV show with Metal Men. I had a buyer for it, but I couldn't get the rights in those days. So there I am at DC, and I know I'm heading out the door, coming close to the end of my time. I'm like, I want to do this book. So one thing I want to do as a writer. It's one thing. It was so much in me that I needed, and it's one of the things I needed to do. Um, and I did the book, and in the course of the storytelling, I brought in my own Mac character. I brought in the Phantom Stranger, another one of my all-time favorite characters, and I brought in Sideways, and I put Sideways in the end. And Sideways sort of saves the day, gets everybody out of the dark dimensions, the dark multiverse. And I left a through line there that was actually a story, and he says he starts to tell a tale of where he was before he saves the Metal Men. To me, was always my follow-up series for Sideways, but it's a character that's near and dear to my heart. My wife is Puerto Rican, so a lot of she was my Spanish specialist in my story, and that's one of those books. So the fact that you say that, it makes me feel good because it's probably the most personal project I ever worked on,
Yeah.
without a doubt.
I
Which is fun.
love that series. I don't know if this would ever happen, but man, if you ever got the opportunity to do another title with DC and it could be Sideways, I think,
That's probably the only thing that I would ever want to write. They called me up. I did the Halloween story where we got to kill Nightwing.
yeah.
They called me up to do that, so that was kind of funny to do that alone.
Yeah.
But the only thing I would ever want to do there is Sideways again. That's the only thing that really gets me excited. Yeah, but I love working on that book. I also got to do, which is another thing that was spectacular. I got to co-write with Grant Morrison, which
Yeah.
was a
Come
hoot
on.
and a half that I don't even know what to say. Because I loved his new 52 Superman. I thought the Gene Superman was just a brilliant examination of the character and a really forward way to approach the character, moving him to a new generation. So I loved everything Grant did with him. So part of my storytelling was to bring that character back and we did a special together. And I also was a monstrous fan of Grant's Seven Soldiers of Victory. I thought he did a brilliant job with that. So I got a chance to work with Grant on two things that I felt were so strong. He did so much great work when I was at DC when I was there, but those are two things that I love that I was able to at least interact with them on a creative level on it, different than when it was, as an executive editor. So that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun.
Well, Dan, I can't tell you how much I appreciate having this conversation with you. What an honor it is to be able to talk to you. I know I
Oh,
was
my
bugging you
pleasure. It's
about it
great.
a year
Um,
ago, and we were trying to figure out a time, and you were pretty busy. So I'm glad that we were able to finally sit.
Yeah, it's actually things are quieter right now. I mean, I disappear for a while. I'm do some traveling in the month of March, but I actually took a big step back. When the Frank Miller stuff is, we went out and we did a bunch of conventions, really ground up. So when all that came to a close, I thought, you know what? Now I'm going to I haven't done this in a very long time, travel just for fun of it.
Yeah,
So I set up a year of travel just for the fun of it, which is actually kind of a nice change of pace.
yeah.
So we'll see how it all works out and see what bugs bite me along the way. It's hard not to be busy, and honestly, as you can see, I love talking comics. So
Yeah.
anytime I get a chance to talk comics, I talk comics. Even to people who have no idea what I'm talking about, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I feel like that's every comic conversation I have with my wife, but
Yeah.
yeah. Well, Dan, are you have any plans to hit any cons over the next
Actually,
month?
that's one of the things I've actually took a step back. I'm actually taking a year off from
Okay.
conventions for the most part, mainly because, like I said, we sort of went heavy on it for a couple of years, and I want to sit back a little bit. And actually, like I said, there's a lot of things that I want to write and create that just need the peace and quiet without that interaction, and also the distraction. Because you hear what's going on, and you walk around like a kid in a candy shop that you want to get involved in. And right now, I just want to really focus on some of the things that I had in that book, that I could finally bring to life.
I love it. I love it. And then as far as if people want to follow you on social media, where can they do that? And
Yeah, I've got Instagram and Facebook. I mean, people can reach out to me there. Honestly, I'm not a big social media person, which much to my own detriment, I guess. But people reach out if they need me. They know how to find me. But again, the good part is we've got the collection of Defenders of the Earth coming out
yes,
this
yes.
week. Just came out.
Yeah, it
You
just
know,
came out and it
glad you
covered
got a copy because I don't have a copy yet. Oh, you got the individuals. Yeah,
I got the floppies, but yeah,
yeah.
definitely got to get out
Number,
there and get
no,
the trade.
I'm gonna say this. Number five. I got a chance to bring back the Skullcopter. I don't know if you know what the Skullcopter is, but I just think it's the stupidest but the most
Yeah,
fun. And that's the thing about comics that people lose sight of. It should be just
yeah,
ridiculously funny. You should be laughing and giggling about these things and getting caught up in the adventure and swept away with things that are so ridiculous, but they make sense in the confines of that story. Once you get in that book, you get lost in that fantasy, you get caught up in that fantasy world, and all the actions that occur within that seem to make sense. So much so that when you try to explain it to other people, they look at you like six heads.
yeah, exactly.
I remember being in a cab ride with Grant Morrison, and he explained to me just the mechanics, his ideas and mechanics of comics, which it's just a trip to be part of. It was part of his Super Gods book, and it was just everything he said made perfect sense when he explained it to me. I tried to explain it to somebody else. They thought I lost my mind. But that just shows the
Yeah,
brilliance of storytellers. And some people are good, and the passion and the belief of the story, they're able to sell it in ways that I think makes you just caught up in the fantasy. And that's when comics are working the best. You can catch people up in that fantasy. So I'm hoping people are enjoying what we got going on here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Dan. Well, I want to be very respectful of your time. I can't tell you how much I appreciate getting the opportunity to talk to you, and I
My
hope down
pleasure. My
the road we
pleasure.
can do it
Thank you. Thanks for
again.
having me. It's been a blast. And like I said, I get excited because again, the one thing I miss by not going to conventions is that interaction with fans. I loved conventions, the panels, the craziness of the panels, the energy of the panels, and they used to feed you because when you work in isolation, you sort to lose track of what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So when you get out there and mix it with the folks and hear what they're liking and hear what they're enjoying, it either validates what you're doing or reminds you that you get yourself back on track a little bit if you're a little off course.
Yeah,
So that was always a fun thing to do. So that's the only thing I miss at the conventions. I miss the people, but I don't miss the travel. I don't
yeah.
miss the travel.
I can't blame you there. I can't blame you there. Well, Dan, thank you so much, my friend. It was a pleasure talking to you today, and I wish you the very best. Cannot wait to get issue 5, Defenders of the Earth. Everybody, I will have the code below to pick up the trade that is just came out today. If you don't get it from your comic book store, I'll give you the link to where you can get it. Everybody, you should be reading Defenders of the Earth. And Dan, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you. Have a great rest of your week, my friend.
Thank you so much. A pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks again for having me.
You bet. We'll talk soon. Thank you.
Okay, bye now.
Bye-bye.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.